Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I don't think I'm showing up on the screen right now. Craig, Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to get us started for our next workshop. So for our next workshop, we have Craig Willetsko from the Fair Housing Justice Center. Craig worked at FHJC as a tester from 2009 to 2019, and then joined the staff full-time as the Community Engagement Coordinator. He holds a BFA degree in drama from Carnegie Mellon University and has worked extensively for over 30 years in film, television, regional theaters, national tours, and on Broadway. And so he will be sharing with us today about the Fair Housing Justice Center, which is a nonprofit civil rights organization dedicated to eliminating housing discrimination, promoting policies that foster open, accessible, and inclusive communities, and strengthening enforcement of fair housing laws. So I'll turn it over to you, Craig. Thank you.
Great. I'm assuming everybody can hear me. I saw earlier, I think we got about 23 or 24 folks involved. There was some talk about how we're going to do Q&A. For now, I think go ahead, use the chat and the Q&A function on your Zoom. And if we figure out a way to sort of make something a little bit more intimate, we'll talk about that later on. But hello, my name is Craig Willetsko. As Nicole said, I'm from the Fair Housing Justice Center. I wanted to thank Nicole and Mark for having me back this year, and give a shout out to Lucas and Reverend Van Hoek for their presentation, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I hope everybody else did too. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started with a little PowerPoint that I've set up. I go here and there, and if I say share, did it work? All right. So hi, I'm here to talk about Fair Housing Justice Center, fair housing, a little bit about housing in the time of COVID-19, some specific concerns that obviously this time is not like any other that we've been dealing with, and how certain ways that affects fair housing. And also to talk to you about an exciting new initiative we have started called the Building the Beloved Community initiative. Let me get to, oh, wait. Sorry, tech. There it is. As Nicole said, FHJC has a three-part mission. We are the largest, I should say, our service area covers all 5 boroughs of New York City and the 7 surrounding suburban counties in New York. Altogether, our service area is approximately 65% of the New York State population and about 3% of the nationwide population. So that gives us the largest service area of any fair housing organization in the country. And this is our 3-part mission, as she said. How do we go about achieving that mission? We've got 4 basic areas of programming. Bread and butter, we are primarily an investigative organization. We do undercover housing discrimination investigations. As Nicole said, that's how I got started with the organization. One of the things that makes us more effective, or as effective as we are being in New York City, there's no shortage of actors around who are looking to pick up a few dollars on the side and maybe do some good while they're at it. But there's several of us on staff who started out as testers and have now joined the full-time staff because we believe in the work so strongly. So yes, we do investigations to root out housing discrimination. We also do a fair amount of policy advocacy. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. We provide training to other organizations, and we do education and outreach activities like I'm doing with you guys today. I'm going to take a little sidetrack now. Normally this is a lot about fair housing and fair housing history and advocacy, but I know folks have tuned in concerned about specific COVID-19 concerns around housing and fair housing issues. Like I said, we're primarily an investigative organization. But I spoke to some of our intake analysts who are dealing with some calls from folks who are having just straight up tenants issues during the pandemic. So I've got a few resources I want to share. Feel free to either take a screenshot or if you want to take a picture of your screen to get some of this information. The first one I want to share is the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation and Development. There you see their webpage. They are the organization in the city or the part of city government that deals with housing and tenants' rights. And they have a specific page on their website dedicated to COVID-19 quarantine information with the changing rules around the eviction moratorium and which laws are covering the eviction moratorium and when does that expire and what does that mean. They are constantly updating their website with the new rules and regulations regarding evictions around COVID-19. They also have a tenant resource portal. If you are worried about evictions, there's tons of information there, steps you can take, who to contact for help. And most importantly, or not most importantly, but also a simple tenant helpline. If you call the city's 311 number, when the voice prompts you, if you say tenant helpline, you'll get connected right away to somebody who can give you some information there. I also wanted to point people toward the Metropolitan Council on Housing. This is where our intake analysts tend to refer people who are calling about tenant issues, specifically during COVID. There you see their phone number. They normally have drop-in hours. That's been replaced now with mostly the call-in. And they also host a radio show once a week with live call-ins for questions and answers. You can either listen on the actual radio, like old school, or you can listen online at their website, the broadcast station's website, wbai.org. So those are the two organizations I wanted to share with anyone out there looking for information around COVID-relating housing resources. Like I said, education and outreach is part of what we do, and I wanted to talk about another program we have, the Building the Beloved Community Coalition. This is an interfaith initiative that we put together 2 years ago, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. We partnered with Union Theological Seminary and the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing. And so we've been around for a couple of years. Things, as you can imagine, during COVID have slowed down somewhat. But we do have a monthly newsletter that goes out with lots of advocacy opportunities and updates on fair housing issues around the city and ways to get involved. So this is the time, if we were all meeting in person, when I would bring up this phrase, the beloved community, and ask everybody to give me an example of, what do you think of when you hear beloved community? And you would raise your hands, and we don't necessarily want to do this over Zoom with everybody typing, but things like social justice and caring about each other and freedom to be who we are together. But I did think Reverend Thorne, during her sermon, had a wonderful phrase that stuck with me. She says, and I think it applies, I like to think of beloved community as a place where we belong to one another. I thought that was really inspiring. And the next slide shows all those different kinds of answers about the beloved community. It was, in fact, a concept that was first developed by the philosopher and theologian Josiah Royce. But the phrase was popularized and used a great deal by Dr. Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights era. As we see, it was his way of appealing to faith leaders, and it was the ultimate, in some ways, the ultimate goal of the Civil Rights Movement, creating this beloved community, creation of a just, equitable, integrated society free from discrimination and segregation. Sort of captured that in his famous speech, "My children are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And one reason we wanted to use this phrase in creating our coalition in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act was the Fair Housing Act actually was passed in the immediate aftermath of Dr. King's assassination in 1968. The rioting in the street, the social upheaval finally spurred Congress to come together and pass some serious fair housing legislation nationwide for the first time in our history. But as we see, we have fair housing laws, but we do not yet have fair housing. So this initiative brings together people of faith organizations around the city and around the area. We're trying to increase public awareness about fair housing issues and engage people to take action, to build the beloved community by advancing fair housing issues. As we said, fair housing is the cornerstone of this vision. I recently had an interview with a reporter from the Daily Beast who was looking at the connections between uh, uh, social disparities, racial disparities in the country, and bringing it back to housing. And I told her sometimes when I'm watching my television, I'm watching the news about events going on around uh, police mistreatment, around different educational opportunities. I scream at my television, it all comes back to housing. It all comes back to housing. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author or the creator of the 1619 Project in the New York Times, she has said that housing and education are sort of among the last parts of racial justice to really kick in this country. You know, the military has been successfully integrated. There's a lot of still much work to be done, but employment isn't as big an issue. But when it comes to housing and it comes to education, and she says that's because it's civil rights made personal, right? It hits us literally where we live. And that's why it has become the cornerstone of this initiative we're trying to create. So we need to look a little bit at history to understand how we got where we are today. And this could be its own 2, 3, 4 hour presentation, or even an entire college course. I find it fascinating, and in the work that I've been doing since joining full-time at the staff, learning more and more about the history of how we got here is really telling and very eye-opening. So in a nutshell, you can't really talk about segregation in this country without recognizing that this isn't something that just happened. I hear that phrase a lot in talks I give. I'm not a sociologist, but there's a tendency to think, well, it's human nature. People are only comfortable around people who are like them, and we're fearful of people who we perceive as different. And so housing segregation is just something that happens all by itself. The truth is, we in America don't really know that because we've never been given a chance. If you look back at the census tracts from around 1890, outside of the South, as you look in the North and into the Midwest, we don't see a lot of this like systemic, hardcore patterns of racially segregated neighborhoods. People of different races lived side by side. It was a much more common thing. There was much more of a shared culture and language. But with the beginning of the Great Migration, following Reconstruction, when millions of African Americans were leaving the South and coming into those cities, that triggered a series of actions, policies and practices by governments, local governments, state governments, and private institutions like the real estate industry. And this was a coordinated, massive, well-funded effort to keep people of different races from coming together, from commingling, from living near each other. So these policies and practice segregated metropolitan regions, and they really did benefit. It was all designed to benefit white people in this country. And these effects over the decades, over the more than a century now, have been systemic and multi-generational. So what are these policies we're talking about? I could go on and on, like I said, but some of the most egregious, starting with racial zoning ordinances. And these were set up by city governments in response to the changing population. And they were designed to keep, like I said, laws on the books and it does sound, a lot of times people think of South Africa. If you say the word apartheid and talking about legal racial separation, they say, oh, that didn't happen here. Well, it did. And this is an example from Oklahoma City, I believe. It said who was allowed to live where. Sometimes it even talked about you weren't even allowed to go to be seen in certain neighborhoods. And interestingly enough, this one, it's not just restrictions on African Americans. This also restricted white citizens of the city from entering, residing, occupying African American neighborhoods as well. These ordinances were prohibited by the Supreme Court in 1917, but by then the pattern had kind of already been established. It was seen as normal for people of different races to live in different neighborhoods. That was a government policy, and right about the same time that racial zoning ordinances were knocked down by the Supreme Court, The real estate industry, which had recently begun to organize, stepped in with some policies of their own. A lot of you might be familiar with this concept already of the race restrictive covenants. This were language that was put into the deed of sale at a time a house was sold, and it basically, and there was different versions of it in different parts of the country, but basically it said that this house may not be sold to anyone but a white person. And it's important to note that this wasn't just for that one sale. The language in the covenant said this goes in perpetuity. So when you buy this house, you promise to only sell to a white person. And by signing this deed, you are agreeing to force the next buyer, the next white buyer, will also only ever sell this house to a white person. And these were perfectly legal for many years. In addition to race restrictive covenants, for individual sales, individual deeds of sale, the real estate industry also broadened this out with the concept of the homeowners association. A lot of people think of HOAs, which are still around in most suburban neighborhoods. Things about, oh, you have to keep your lawn manicured a certain way, or you're not allowed to paint your doors certain colors. But originally they were formed to put these restrictive covenants in entire neighborhoods, entire housing developments. And as you see there, by 1928 even, half of all white homes in the country had race restrictive covenants that would go in perpetuity. These, by the way, if you are a homeowner, if you go home, if you take out your deed of sale, these were eventually struck down, but it's a big legal hassle to have the deed taken out. A lot of times they'll just add another paragraph saying, oh, paragraph 3, the race restrictive covenant is no longer viable, is struck down. But a lot of people will be surprised if they go down and look at the original paperwork from when they bought their house. You can find these restrictions, the original language of these restrictions are often still in the deed today. Another policy of housing discrimination that people are most familiar with is this idea of redlining. These were maps that were created by the federal government during the Great Depression. The goal was to save the housing market during the housing depression. Prices were falling. People were in fear of losing their homes. So the government wanted to make it easier for people to get credit to either refinance the home they were in or buy another home. But there was some concern about the risk of those loans that were being made. So they formed an entity called the Homeowners Loan Corporation to go around cities, neighborhoods, and rate different neighborhoods for their risk, because the government didn't want to, lose too much money if these loans went bad. And without any scientific study, the folks who put these maps together designated that neighborhoods with a high concentration of African Americans, Hispanics, people of color in general, those neighborhoods, as you see in this picture, I think from the 1940s, were coded red. That's why we came up with the term redlining. So the government would not insure those loans. People in those neighborhoods could not get loans, not just to buy. If you wanted to buy in that neighborhood, you had a hard time. You might have ended up paying cash. Excuse me. And not only to buy homes, but even, like I said, refinancing. Or if you wanted a home improvement loan, you couldn't get one. If you wanted business loans in those neighborhoods to start new businesses, it was very difficult to get them. So, and this is something I learned to do in my work, this designation of, oh, these are undesirable neighborhoods that was originally put in place eventually became a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if a neighborhood over the decades, if it's too difficult to invest in that community, you are going to see that community begin to decline. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. We did see these neighborhoods decline. And sadly, when you look at maps of racial disparity, maps of poverty rates, you can lay them over these red line maps from the 40s and 50s, and you can see an almost exact correlation. So we're still living with this legacy today. So those were 3 of the most egregious policies. Depending on how long we go today, and if folks want to stay on and have some Q&A, There are also issues like steering and blockbusting and black belts that I find fascinating. And if anyone wants to stick around and maybe even share some of their own experiences, I'd be interested in having that discussion. So like I said, in 1968, in the immediate aftermath of Dr. King's assassination, the Fair Housing Act was passed. And this is our current set of fair housing laws. And this is actually a slide that, and all of our printed paperwork, I keep needing to update because they keep changing. I will point out in New York State law, that's a recent addition, that lawful source of income. Sometimes that's a little confusing. That generally refers to housing vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, folks who use some kind of government assistance program to help them pay their rent. That is a lawful source of income. And landlords are not allowed to discriminate on folks just because that's where they get some of their rent money. So here's all these protected classes. I will say proudly, New York City, we have among, because each of these is cumulative, right? So the New York State includes all the federal protections, and New York City includes all the state and federal protections. So the Big Apple is trying to do the right thing in terms of fair housing. So we can take some pride in that. But these have all been in place, some of them going back more than 50 years. So this is where I ask, how does it look like we're doing? And the answer is not so great. In New York City and across the entire country, entrenched residential segregation is continuing without a lot of change, especially in the metropolitan areas. New York City ranks third worst for African Americans, second worst for Asian Americans and Latinx populations. I'm not sure if we have any Long Islanders in the crowd today, but even for those who are not, I would encourage you to do a quick Google search. Newsday last year, the Long Island newspaper, did a massive, massive story that we actually consulted on. They sent some of their own fair housing testers to look at the market there, testers of different races. And you can see their unequal treatment was evidenced. And this, frankly, is being generous. My boss, Executive Director Fred Freiberg, was one of the consultants who viewed the undercover secret videotapes that were taken of the testers' interactions with the real estate agents. And he was pretty generous about what was blatant discrimination and what wasn't. But even on that scale, 19%, 39%, and 49% of the time. And Newsday actually put the footage, the raw footage is on their website from the hidden cameras, interactions. Basically, this is how undercover testing works. You set up generally a white tester and a tester, an African-American or Latinx tester. You give them false identities that are equivalent, right, in terms of salary, education, credit scores, et cetera, and you send them out to deal with the same housing provider or real estate agent, and you make in New York State, we can make a recording of what they're told and what listings they're shown and what they're told about. And almost more often than not, white testers get preferential treatment. So we're not doing that well in 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act. Like I said, it's subtle and it's hidden. My boss Fred talks a lot about the analogy of the slammed door versus the revolving door, right? Prior to the laws being passed, real estate agents, housing providers could slam the door in someone's face and just say, we don't want your kind here. Since the passage of the laws, that has often been replaced with a revolving door. It's the smile and the handshake and, oh, I'm very sorry, but we don't have anything available right now. Try again next month. Or oh, we do have some lovely homes available in this neighborhood over here. Let me drive you over there and we can look at some of those. The vast majority of people who experience housing discrimination have no idea because they're being treated with courtesy and politeness, and without testing, we wouldn't know this was going on. And that's one of the reasons it's difficult to do this. The fair housing laws of the last 50 years have never been rigorously enforced. Resources have not been invested. Ultimately, there's been a failure to recognize some of the history that we looked at, the enormous, massive, coordinated, well-funded effort that created this system of discrimination. And it's going to take a massive, coordinated, well-funded effort to undo the damage that's been done. So what does discrimination, hello, back up. What does discrimination look like today? I told you a little bit about that revolving door analogy. You can watch some of the tapes of the Newsday story. We're also seeing, like I said, since source of income was added to the protections of New York State, there are still a lot of landlords who claim to not be aware that they are not allowed to discriminate against people who are using vouchers. You'll still see advertising that says, no programs, don't even bother applying. A lot of times, folks, one of our clients actually had a HASA voucher. He's a person living with AIDS, and there's a program to help him pay his rent. And when he showed up with his voucher, the real estate agent said, "Oh, we didn't realize these are the listings for voucher people," and took out a whole different book and sent him in a whole different direction. And he told us later that apparently voucher people are different from people. And it's painful. It's painful, and it has an effect on how you see yourself. We also see some of the testing we do is about disability discrimination. Not so much there in what people are told about what's available and what's not, but as of 1991, new buildings are required to be compliant with fair housing rules for people with disability issues, people who use wheelchairs. And so we will send teams out with tape measures and find out if the new building is compliant or not. So we're seeing a lot of that. There's also one of the more frightening aspects of discrimination today is not happening by individual people, landlords or real estate agents, but by algorithms. We're seeing more and more businesses being done. Applicants are being scanned. You enter your information into the computer program, right? And it spits out, here are the homes you are most likely to qualify for. Here are the homes you are most likely to be interested in. We actually joined a group of other organizations a few years ago and sued Facebook. Facebook's algorithm for advertising homes would allow you to plug in certain characteristics, and you could basically, and we found, you could screen out almost any group of protected characteristics. You could screen out people of several different races. You could screen out people with disabilities. We did find, no matter how hard we tried, we could not prevent the housing ads from being seen by one particular group, and that was white people. So this was part, like I said, of a pretty big lawsuit that Facebook actually settled and has since made a massive payout to all the organizations involved and has changed their policies. Nowadays, if you are looking to advertise for housing or employment, there's a separate advertising portal, and the screening tools are not available. All those ads have to be seen by everybody. So that's kind of what we're up against today in the work we're doing. I did want to take another moment to talk a little bit about the pandemic and how that is affecting fair housing issues. I spoke to my colleagues who work in intake, and I said, what are you seeing? Early on, we saw stories about, and you may have seen this too in the news, some of this may be linked to this idea of calling COVID-19 the China flu, this idea that somehow Asian Americans are responsible for or Asians are responsible for bringing this. And there were quite a few stories of Asian Americans being discriminated against in their homes. There were stories of healthcare workers, frontline workers were engendering fear about contamination and were losing their homes. There were stories of nurses having to sleep in their cars because they weren't allowed back into their home, along with other essential workers. We've also seen increases in sexual harassment, landlords who take advantage of someone who's having trouble paying their rent because maybe they've been laid off. A lot of demands for sexual favors as a way of paying rent. We're also seeing, and this is also troubling, during this time, there's a lot of awareness that the housing market is in huge upheaval. People are worried about seeking a home during this time. So if there is something going on, if they are suffering from harassment in their current apartment, if there's problems with the landlord in general, there's a reluctance to bring any kind of complaint because people are worried about conflict, worried about losing their home because they're not sure they'll be able to find another one. The government offices, HUD's offices and the HPD offices have been closed to in-person interactions. And these are the folks who run the housing voucher programs that we're talking about. So while those programs are stalled, that's causing a chain effect because the vouchers, once they're given, have a limited time. And if folks are having trouble finding a home because of the pandemic, they're not adjusting the dates on the vouchers. So that's a problem going on. And like we see, overall, those programs are becoming increasingly stressed because of the increased numbers of people who are either looking for their, applying for vouchers now or expected to be applying for vouchers soon. One hopeful point that we are hoping to see signs of as the housing market continues to be in upheaval and as we're starting to see rents actually come down, some of these landlords we're hoping might start to see housing discrimination as a luxury that they can no longer afford. That might just be Craig's wishful thinking, that looking for some kind of silver lining in all this. But we've got our eyes open because I've seen it's a renter's market much more than it has been in certain areas. So I'm hopeful that maybe we'll start to see some of this discrimination start to decrease as we go along. So now I want to talk about the overall harm of segregation and discrimination. Like we say, where you live matters. Real estate agents have this mantra, right? When you're going to sell a home, it's all about location, location, location. But what does that mean exactly? Location means what kind of grocery stores do you have access to, right? We have, they're called food deserts nowadays. Folks whose only options for food are either crazy expensive or junk food. That contributes to health concerns. That contributes to life expectancy. Health concerns are also affected by what kind of industrial facilities are you forced to live next to, asthma rates in neighborhood. It's all about where you live. What kind of schools? The very fact that in this country, we fund our schools based on local property taxes is setting us up to have unequal schools. Who has a right to attend those schools and who is stuck having to attend these other schools? So we keep saying where you live matters. It all comes down to location. Oh, here we go. Job opportunities, schools, wealth accumulation. So the biggest driver of wealth accumulation, generational wealth accumulation, is home ownership. And folks who have for generations been denied the opportunity of home ownership have been cut out of decades and generations of wealth increase based on that home. So you don't see the standard, we start with a starter home, we have kids and now our home is increased in value and we can flip it and buy a bigger home. And as the kids get older, we can take out a second mortgage, a home equity loan based on the increased equity. And now we can send our kids to college and now our kids graduate from college. They start out in a better position than we are. That cycle that so many white people take for granted in this country is not available. By and large, to people of color it's not as accessible because of housing discrimination. And we've seen this summer and for years now, differences in police interactions based on who you are and where you live. And healthcare and life expectancy we've talked about as well. So now that I've raised all your concerns about housing discrimination, what can we do? How do I report discrimination? Easiest way is to go on our website at fairhousingjustice.org. You can give us a call, 212-400-8201. And I also want a special shout out to folks who may not be experiencing discrimination themselves, but who are aware of it happening somewhere or who witness it. We're gearing up to do a new ad campaign, sort of like if you see something, say something. If you have a friend who works in real estate and you hear about a colleague who is absolutely refusing to work with people of color, or doesn't like working with this one landlord because he's so discriminatory in who he lets in his building. Those are stories that can all be followed up with investigations and some enforcement actions. If you're in a co-op, if you notice your co-op board is keeping out certain types of people and only allowing in certain other types of people, that's a form of discrimination that can also be reported. So we're encouraging folks to come forward. Possible remedies involve, like we said, legal referrals. We can put people in touch with some of the law firms we work with. If the case goes forward, if we do an investigation, case goes forward, there's monetary and non-monetary relief. Injunctive relief, we can force people to stop the discrimination. Also, there's a new, not that new, but in some of the source of income cases we're seeing, there are now landlords, as a result of these settlements when they've been caught discriminating, are agreeing to set aside certain units specifically for voucher holders. So that's encouraging. Also, if a person with disabilities is experiencing discrimination and wants to report it, we have a special fund set up, the Adele Freeman Housing Accessibility Fund, that has some money available. We can either help you with your legal issues with your landlord, or if you need help paying for modifications to your home, if you need a ramp installed, if you need grab bars installed in your shower, we have money set aside that can help with that. And there's the place to contact us right there. And here's where I get to toot my own horn a little bit. 67,000 units of housing have been opened up. We've recovered more than $43 million in damages. And in addition to Facebook and those landlords I've talked about, we've changed the way a lot of providers are doing business. There's much more work to be done, obviously, but we're proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And that brings me back to the Beloved Community Coalition. So, like I said, what was done deliberately can only be undone with an equal effort and intention. And we're excited to get the ball rolling on this again. Like I said, we've been a little bit dormant in terms of COVID. We're revamping our training that will take place as part of this, and I'll tell you a little bit more of that in a moment. How can you get involved with the Beloved Community Coalition? If you go to our website, BBC, where did it go? I'll put it up again. We have the Fair Housing Toolkit as part of our Beloved Community website. It's 5 different parts. You can see a little glimpse of it here. Anyone who wants to get involved, any organization who wants to get involved can download this. You can print it up, you can share it. There's tons of ways there to get involved. You can join our Interfaith Action Network. If you go to the website, there's a place there to join. You'll begin getting our newsletters, our monthly newsletters, and you'll also get occasionally shout outs. We have some legislation pending in Albany right now. And once it's brought forward, we'll be calling on folks to join us in letter writing, in making phone calls, and other types of advocacy. Part of that toolkit that you'll see is our 30 ways to advance fair housing. It's a list 1 through 30. Sometimes I like thinking about it as days of the month. Do a little something every day. And there's a little sample of what we offer there. We also are training a group of fair housing leaders. These are for folks from faith organizations, other nonprofits, to go through a specific training that they can go back to their community or their organization and share some of this information, raise this awareness, and increase opportunities for advocacy. And of course, social media, can't go wrong. Here's our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts. Would love to have you as followers. I hate that word followers, but I'd love to have you as followers. And there's our website. You'll see bbcfairhousing.org. Also fairhousingjustice.org for our main organizational website. And there's my email and contact number if you want to take a picture or do a screenshot. I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to get more involved in this work or learn more about what we do. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. And I'm going to click stop share. And I'm going to see if anyone, oh, here we go. So I've not been able to see the chat for a while. Looks like we've got, oh yeah, here it is. Someone says, no landlord wants to accept vouchers because it is a hassle to get paid. Yes, I agree. And that's actually part of something we are prodding our state legislators to do. It was one thing to make source of income a protected class, um, but it's another thing when that process is still so complicated, and I know that apartments have to be certified by the program before they're allowed, and it is an extra burden. I don't think we can make any bones about that. But the extra burden sitting on the landlords, that's the next part that needs to be solved. It doesn't need, I feel, it shouldn't be weighing on the voucher holder to try to change the system. Their voucher is good for 30 days or 60 days. And in that time, that needs to be enough time for a landlord who gets approached by an applicant with a voucher to see that process through. So that's the next part of the system that needs to be fixed. Are there any other questions out there? I'm not sure how many folks are still left. Let's see, it says we've got 22. Oh, hey, Nicole.
I'm back. I don't see a question right now, but I do see Brenda just asking for your contact information in the chat at some point.
Oh, you know what? I'll put, yes, you know what? I'll just type it right in there. Should I spell right? My fingers are too fast. Housing. Oh Lord, that's embarrassing. It's not Hustis, it's Justice. Okay. And I'll do my number. 8, 7. Terrific. So that's me. If anyone wants to get in touch and learn more about our work or get more involved. And yeah, if anyone else has any questions, I'd love to answer or start a conversation.
Craig, with the Building the Beloved Community Coalition, is there like an official process that organizations or churches would go through to sort of officially join that, or is it kind of a
you know what, it's yes, thank you, it's a great question. As for the last several months, we've sort of been existing, I'll be honest, as mostly a monthly newsletter. The activities have not been rolling. I'm hoping now that we're all kind of figuring out working remotely and Zoom meetings and everything, there is the official list of folks who are part of the coalition that started 2 years ago when it was first formed. My next step working with the coalition is to reach out again to everybody and maybe revamp those lists. And I'd be very interested if there are organizations who are not yet a part of it, who are interested in being official members. Please reach out to me.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions at the moment. Folks, feel free to put questions that you might have.
I see a question about do we address gentrification from Elaine?
Oh.
Awesome question, and a longer conversation. It is a tricky issue. The idea of folks who, generations of a certain community in a certain neighborhood being displaced is horrible and needs to be addressed. The issue came up recently. There's policies about when there's turnover in a neighborhood, when new housing is being built, and who gets first dibs on the affordable housing that's being built. FHJC is not in favor necessarily of doing neighborhood set-asides. Some areas have policies where if you're already in the neighborhood, you get first priority as a way of fighting against gentrification. There's good sides and bad sides to that. And one of the bad sides is by putting that policy in place, you're basically saying, we don't want folks from outside our area to come in here, period, at all. And it's the same side. FHJC is trying to find ways of fighting gentrification that don't involve barring entry to folks of a different color or of a different protected status from a neighborhood. But it is a long and involved conversation, especially as we're seeing neighborhood turnover in parts of Brooklyn, parts of the Bronx that are, it's dreadful. But it's, like I said, we're not a tenant advocacy organization. It's like we're about housing discrimination and fighting systemic housing discrimination is more of the work that we do. I hope I answered your question. Oh, you're welcome, Elaine.
Are there any other questions out there?
Returning from jail or prison, is there fair housing laws to address that? Oh, hey, Mark. I'm glad you asked. I actually just did a quick refresher as I was listening to the previous presentation. Arrest record and criminal record is not a protected class per se, but in New York, it's very interesting. The housing providers are not permitted to ask a prospective buyer or tenant about their criminal record, which is interesting. If the criminal record is there, if it is found out, if the landlord does some research, and these days it's very interesting to do. The wording of the law is tricky. There was a reinterpretation or a new interpretation back in 2016 of the Fair Housing Act that kind of basically says it's on a case-by-case basis, right? You're not allowed to have a blanket policy that says absolutely no one with a criminal record is allowed to rent in my building. It kind of depends on the type of offense, how long ago the offense was. If somebody just got out of jail because they shot their landlord and burned their building down previously, you've got a leg to stand on and saying, maybe I don't want to rent to this person, but it goes case by case basis. Yes. Also, that sex offenders I see in the chat room, that's also one of the lists. That offense is allowed to be discriminated.
Are there any other questions out there? I don't see anything in the Q&A box.
Well, I'm hoping if the world gets back to, or if the world is not in the state it's in this year, this is my second year back. And like I said, I'm thanking again, Nicole and Mark for having me back. As you can tell, I can ramble on and on about this stuff. I told them as we were setting this up, my favorite part of this presentation last year is the sitting around the table with coffee and talking about these issues, and maybe some of the interactions between people from different groups, people from different generations with different perspectives on the history of where we've been, where we are now, and where we go and how we address these issues moving forward. So next fall, if depending on where the world is at, I hope to see some of the 21 of you who are still in the room, maybe sitting around a table with me, talking with an actual slideshow on a screen, and maybe I'll even update my slides. But thank you so much for having me today and letting me share some of this message.
Thank you so much for being here again. It's a lot of information always, and it's always good, even if, for folks who have participated in the past, to have a refresher. I think even if the slides are different, like, you take away new things and collect more information every time because it is so complicated and so much going on. So we always appreciate you being here. So thank you. Thank you so much. That wraps our second and final workshop. I'm going to turn it over to Mark to give us our closing.
Thank you, Nicole. I guess the one thing, no, I am unmuted. Just a couple of things in closing. Craig, if you're still with us, I would like to thank you for the work you did to incorporate the realities of COVID-19 and how they are impacting housing and fair housing in particular. That was very, very helpful, at least to me. I suspect it was to many of us. I did take photos of Craig's slides, and so I will pull the web pages, the resources he referenced, put them together with the material from this morning's presentation, or we're technically afternoon, from this morning's earlier presentation, as well as the material that I mentioned that Dave had assembled. I'll get that sent out to you. I need to be honest, don't look for it until Tuesday or so, but I will get that sent out to everybody. As Craig said, we do look forward to the 4th annual. We do look forward to that being in person, where we can actually go and have those bagels and share that coffee. One more thing for everyone to know, we have been YouTube living. I don't know if that's the right way to express this, but this has been on YouTube Live as it's been happening. We hadn't said anything before now because we wanted you to stay with us instead of jumping over and watching it on YouTube. But my understanding of how the technology works is that when we're all done, it will still be there, and we can share that YouTube link, and you can share that with other folks. Which then brings me to say thank you to Nicole for doing the technology. It was wonderful to sit back here. Yes, Craig is clapping. I would encourage everybody else to clap, even though she can't see or anyone else. It has been wonderful to just kind of sit back here and watch this all happen. And you know, every now and then Nicole would say, "It's your turn, Mark. It's your turn, Mark." And just to have her take that responsibility has been truly wonderful. So thank you so much, Nicole. I know Alexis is gone, but we also thank her for being our liturgist. And I have already texted our thanks to Reverend Adrian Thorne for her sermon. I'm going to send her another one and tell her that Craig quoted her in the second presentation to let her know that indeed that her sermon set us up for a wonderful day. And I want to thank everyone who is here now. I also know there are people, again, I've kind of been watching the participants list. There have been people who've joined us for parts and then had to leave. But I thank everyone who is here with us now, who has been with us today. I thank you for the questions. I thank you for your commitment. And together we will go forth and build the beloved community as we live into the Matthew 25 vision. And we will do so with the help of God. Let the people say, amen. Nicole, anything you want to say? Any last words you want to say?
The only thing that I would add to the thank yous are to our music director at First Church, Michael Shake, and the other folks that helped in putting together the music for the worship service this morning. I really appreciate that support, so thank you.
So until next year for Advocacy Day, but starting on Monday, let's all get out there and find the issues that God puts on our hearts and advocate for them. Advocate for justice in the name of Jesus Christ. Have a blessed weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you.